Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Imagine your own brother setting you up for a crime you didn't commit just to get his hands on your inheritance. Now, years later, he's the one begging you to save him from prison. Yeah, this is my life right now. Growing up, my brother Liam was my hero. He was 5 years older, tall, confident, and always seemed to have the answers to everything. While I was shy and bookish, Liam was the golden boy, the one who could charm anyone with a smile. He protected me from school bullies, taught me how to ride a bike, and even let me tag along with his friends sometimes. From the outside, we were the picture of a perfect sibling bond. Our family wasn't rich, but we weren't struggling either. Dad was a small business owner who worked hard to provide for us, and Mom stayed at home, managing the household like clockwork. We weren't the kind of family to flaunt what we had, but everyone knew Dad had been smart with his money. He was the type to plan for the future, and he made sure Liam and I knew that when the time came, everything would be divided equally. 50-50, he'd say with a wink, so you two better learn how to share now. But life has a way of throwing curveballs. When I was 23 and just starting my first job, Dad died unexpectedly of a heart attack. One minute he was fine, watching TV in the living room, and the next, he was gone. It was like the ground beneath us disappeared overnight. Mom was inconsolable, barely eating or sleeping. Liam and I, for all our differences, leaned on each other during those first few weeks. At least, that's what I thought was happening. It started small. Liam offered to take over the estate paperwork, saying it was too much for Mom to handle in her fragile state. He was 32 at the time, and with his corporate job and experience, it seemed logical. I didn't question it. Why would I? He was the responsible one, the one who always had things under control. Don't worry, he told me one night while we were cleaning up the kitchen. I'll handle all the boring legal stuff. You just focus on helping Mom get through this. I was grateful. I was still reeling from the loss of Dad and trying to juggle work with making sure Mom was okay. Liam's offer seemed like a blessing. Over the next few months, he dropped little updates here and there about the estate, just some paperwork, or had a meeting with Dad's lawyer today, all good. But looking back, I realized how little detail he actually shared. Then, something shifted. Liam started acting different. He became more secretive, dodging questions about the estate or brushing them off with vague answers. It's complicated, he'd say, or you wouldn't want to get bogged down in the details. Mom, still grieving, didn't seem to notice or care. She was too focused on just getting through each day without Dad. I started to feel a bit uneasy, but I didn't want to be the paranoid younger sibling. Liam had always been the one who knew what he was doing, right? Why would he lie? Things came to a head about a year after Dad's death. Mom had a stroke. It wasn't massive, but it left her with some mobility issues and memory lapses. She needed constant care, which Liam offered to take on. It makes sense for her to move in with me, he said during a family meeting. My house is more accessible, and I can hire someone to help. It sounded reasonable. I lived in a cramped apartment across town, and Liam's place was much larger. Mom agreed without hesitation, saying she didn't want to be a burden to me. Still, something about the arrangement didn't sit right with me. Liam was suddenly very insistent on controlling everything. Mom's healthcare, her finances, even decisions about her property. He started keeping me at arm's length, saying things like, "Don't worry, I've got this under control," whenever I tried to get involved. And then there was the paperwork. One day, while visiting Mom at Liam's house, I noticed a stack of documents on the kitchen counter. One page caught my eye. It had Mom's name on it, but the signature didn't look quite right. When I asked Liam about it, he snapped, "It's just some routine stuff for the estate. Why are you snooping?" It was the first time I'd ever heard him sound angry with me. I apologized, but the encounter left a sour taste in my mouth. For the first time, I started wondering if Liam's intentions were as noble as he wanted us to believe. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. What seemed like a simple division of family responsibilities would unravel into something far darker, something that would threaten to destroy not only our relationship but my entire life. A year after Dad passed, life felt like it was finally starting to stabilize, at least on the surface. Mom's stroke changed everything overnight. It was a mild one, but enough to leave her needing help with even basic tasks. She struggled to remember things and had trouble walking without assistance. Liam, ever the take-charge older brother, suggested she move into his home. "It's just logical," he said, sitting across from me in the hospital cafeteria after Mom was discharged. "My house has space. I can afford to hire caregivers, and honestly, she'll be more comfortable there than in that old house." I nodded. It made sense. His place had a ground floor guest suite, while my one-bedroom apartment barely had room for me, let alone a recovering parent. Mom seemed on board too, though I could tell she was reluctant to leave the home she'd shared with Dad for over 30 years. "Don't worry, I'll make sure she's taken care of," Liam said, his voice firm. "You don't have to stress about anything." At the time, I felt grateful. But looking back, I realized that was the moment he fully took control. Not just of Mom's care, but of her life, her decisions, and, ultimately, her finances. A few months later, my quiet routine was interrupted by a phone call that flipped my world upside down. I was at work when an officer from the local police department called, informing me that my car had been impounded. "Your vehicle was reported involved in a hit and run," the officer said matter-of-factly. I froze. "That's impossible," I replied. "I haven't even driven my car this week." "Well, ma'am, the surveillance footage we have shows your license plate at the scene of the incident." My stomach dropped. I stammered out something about coming to the station to sort things out, but my mind was already racing. My car had been parked outside my apartment building for days. How could it have been involved in an accident? When I got to the impound lot, the sight of my car, a small scratch on the bumper but otherwise intact, did little to calm my nerves. I reviewed the footage the police had, and sure enough, there was my car speeding through an intersection and grazing a pedestrian who had been crossing the street. The person wasn't seriously hurt, but the driver hadn't stopped. The footage was blurry, but I could clearly see my license plate. My chest tightened as I tried to make sense of it. Then, like a lightning bolt, I remembered. Liam had borrowed my car 2 nights ago. I called Liam immediately. He answered on the second ring, his voice casual. "Hey, what's up?" I didn't waste time. "Did you take my car out the other night? The police just called me about a hit and run." There was a pause, too long to be innocent. "Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention that. I borrowed it to run some errands." "Why? You forgot to mention?" I hissed. "Liam, my car was caught on camera involved in an accident." His tone shifted, defensive. "Calm down. I didn't hit anyone. I took the car to grab groceries and went straight home. If there's some mix-up, it's not my fault." I wanted to believe him, but something didn't sit right. His voice had a forced calmness, like he was trying too hard to convince me. "Well, the cops seem to think otherwise," I shot back. "You need to go to the station and clear this up because they think I was driving." Liam sighed. "Fine, I'll talk to them. But seriously, this is probably just some clerical error. Don't freak out." Days turned into weeks, and Liam never went to the police. Every time I asked, he had a new excuse. "Work's been crazy," or "I'll handle it next week." Meanwhile, the case against me was starting to build. The pedestrian who had been hit filed a complaint, and the police began asking more questions. When an officer showed up at my door with a formal notice to appear for questioning, I felt the walls closing in. I called Liam again, this time not bothering to hide my anger. "Why haven't you cleared this up yet?" I demanded. "I told you. I didn't do anything," he snapped. "Why are you acting like this is my fault?" "Because it is your fault," I yelled. "You were driving my car that night, not me. If you don't step up and take responsibility, I'm going to be the one paying for this." Liam's response chilled me to the bone. "Maybe you should stop blaming other people for your problems," he said coldly. "You're the one who owns the car." It was like a switch had flipped. Gone was the protective older brother who used to stick up for me on the playground. In his place was someone I barely recognized. Someone who didn't seem to care about what happened to me. I decided to dig deeper. I went through my phone records and noticed a string of calls Liam had made to someone on the night of the incident. When I tried to press him about it, he brushed me off, saying it was none of my business. That's when I started to realize this wasn't just a case of him being forgetful or lazy. Something was going on, something bigger than I understood. But at that moment, I didn't have the full picture. All I knew was that the brother I thought I could trust was hiding something, and whatever it was, it had the potential to destroy my life. I'll never forget the moment the police knocked on my door. It was early morning, and I was still in pajamas, sipping coffee. The knock wasn't gentle. It was the kind of knock that immediately makes your stomach drop. When I opened the door, 2 officers stood there, stone-faced. "Are you my name?" one of them asked. "Yes," I said cautiously, gripping the doorframe. "You're under arrest for reckless driving and leaving the scene of an accident," the officer said as he held up a warrant. I was too stunned to speak. My brain couldn't process the words. "Wait, what? No, this has to be a mistake." The officers were professional but firm. They told me to turn around and place my hands behind my back. The cold metal of the cuffs against my wrists sent a jolt of reality through me. This was real. My neighbors peeked out of their windows and doors as the officers walked me to the squad car. The humiliation burned through me. I wanted to scream that it wasn't me, that I was innocent. But what good would that do? At the station, they went through the standard procedure: fingerprinting, mugshots, and endless questions. "Do you understand the charges against you?" one officer asked. I shook my head, my voice trembling. "No, I don't understand. I wasn't driving. My brother borrowed my car that night." They didn't seem impressed. "Your car was identified at the scene, and the pedestrian who was injured has filed charges. We have surveillance footage showing the vehicle. Are you saying it wasn't you behind the wheel?" "Yes," I said, nearly shouting. "I wasn't driving. My brother borrowed it. He must have been the one driving. Please, just talk to him." They exchanged a look, but didn't say much else. Instead, they informed me I'd be held overnight until my arraignment the following day. The weight of their words crushed me. I wasn't going home anytime soon. The jail cell was cold, both literally and figuratively. The walls seemed to close in on me as I sat on the hard bench, staring at nothing. My mind raced in circles. Liam. This was all because of Liam. I replayed every conversation I'd had with him about the car, about the accident, about his excuses for not going to the police. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I still couldn't believe it. Could he really have set me up? The second night was even worse. My lawyer, a public defender I'd barely spoken to, told me the charges were serious. "The pedestrian suffered a fractured leg," he said. "They're arguing that leaving the scene showed reckless disregard for human life. If convicted, you could face jail time." Jail time. The words echoed in my head like a death knell. I begged my lawyer to get in touch with Liam, thinking he could clear everything up. Liam would go to the police, explain that he was driving, and this nightmare would end. That's what brothers do, right? When Liam finally showed up at the station, his expression was unreadable. I was escorted into the visitors area, and there he was, sitting behind the glass with the phone in his hand. I grabbed my own phone, desperate for some reassurance. "Liam," I said, my voice cracking, "you have to tell them the truth. You borrowed my car. You were driving that night. You have to fix this." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding my eyes. "I can't," he said finally. "What do you mean, you can't?" I snapped, my voice rising in disbelief. "I don't have any proof I was driving," he said quietly. "And if I say it was me, it's just my word against the surveillance footage. I'd get charged, and my job, my life, everything would be ruined." "Your life?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "What about mine?" "Liam, they think I did this. I'm looking at jail time because of you." He didn't respond, just stared at the table. His silence was more infuriating than anything he could have said. "Unbelievable," I muttered. "You're going to let me take the fall for this?" "It's not that simple," he said, finally looking up. "If I come forward, it won't just be me. It'll ruin the family. Mom needs me. You know that. If I get charged, who's going to take care of her?" I slammed the phone back into its holder, unable to listen to another word. My own brother, my blood, was leaving me to rot to protect himself. By the time I was released on bail, my world felt like it had been turned upside down. Walking out of that station, I felt like a completely different person. The naive trust I'd always had in Liam was gone, replaced by a gnawing anger and betrayal. Over the next few days, I tried to piece my life back together while dealing with the fallout. Friends and coworkers who heard about the arrest either avoided me or asked invasive questions. My boss was polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. And then there was Liam. I tried calling him again, thinking maybe he'd have a change of heart. But every call went unanswered. I started asking myself questions I never thought I'd have to consider. Was this just Liam being selfish, or was it something more sinister? Had he orchestrated this entire situation to get me out of the picture? I didn't have answers yet, but one thing was clear. I couldn't rely on Liam anymore. If I wanted to clear my name and get my life back, I'd have to do it myself. And that realization was both terrifying and empowering. This wasn't just a case of bad luck or a misunderstanding. Something deeper was going on, and I was determined to find out what it was. The day I walked out of that station on bail, I felt like I was stepping into a storm. Everything in my life was spiraling, and I didn't even know where to start. My lawyer, an older man named Mr. Grayson, was blunt but empathetic. "First things first," he said during our initial meeting. "You need to get your finances in order. If this case drags on, and it likely will, you need to protect yourself. Also, any unusual financial activity could be relevant to your defense." At first, I didn't understand how my finances could connect to the hit and run, but I trusted his advice, So I spent the next day combing through my bank statements, credit card bills, and anything else I could find. It didn't take long for something to jump out. A large withdrawal, several $1,000s, had been made from my account just 2 weeks before the hit and run. The thing was, I didn't remember authorizing it. My stomach twisted as I stared at the transaction. I called the bank immediately, demanding an explanation. After being transferred from one department to another, I finally got someone who could help. The representative explained that the withdrawal had been made through an old joint account linked to a trust fund my dad had set up for Liam and me years ago. That joint account, it had been set up when I was a teenager, back when Dad insisted on teaching us financial responsibility. At the time, it seemed harmless. The account had barely been touched for years, but apparently, Liam still had access to it. The bank's records showed the withdrawal was made in person at a branch near Liam's house. My hands shook as I listened to the details. It wasn't just about the money. This was the first concrete link between Liam and the mess I was in. But it didn't stop there. Fueled by suspicion, I decided to dig deeper into everything related to Dad's estate. I requested copies of documents from the lawyer who had handled the estate after Dad's death. That's when I found something even more alarming. A significant portion of Dad's assets, investments, savings, and even property deeds had been moved around in the past year. Transfers were made to accounts I didn't recognize, and some of the documents had my name on them. The problem? The signatures weren't mine. The realization hit me like a freight train. Liam had been forging my signature. I took the documents to Mr. Grayson, who immediately agreed that they looked suspicious. "This isn't just sloppy bookkeeping," he said, frowning. "This looks deliberate." It was worse than deliberate. It was calculated. Liam hadn't just borrowed my car that night. He'd been building a case to erase me entirely, from the family finances, from Dad's legacy, and now, possibly from society itself, by framing me for a crime. I decided to confront him. This time, I wasn't going to beg for answers or play nice. I wanted the truth, and I wasn't leaving until I got it. When I arrived at Liam's house, Mom was watching TV in the living room. She smiled weakly when she saw me, but she looked tired, more frail than I remembered. I sat with her for a moment, trying to keep my anger in check. "Is Liam home?" I asked, forcing a smile. "He's in his office," she said. "He's been working so hard lately. You should be nicer to him, you know." Her words stung, but I didn't respond. Instead, I walked down the hall to Liam's office and pushed the door open without knocking. He looked up from his desk, startled. "What the hell? My name? Ever heard of knocking?" "I'm done playing games, Liam," I said, slamming the door behind me. "I know about the trust fund. I know about the money. And I know about the forged signatures." His face turned pale, but he quickly recovered, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Cut the crap," I snapped, throwing the documents onto his desk. "You've been stealing from me, and you've been messing with Dad's estate. Do you honestly think I wouldn't find out?" He glanced at the papers, his expression unreadable. "You're being paranoid. Those transfers were legitimate. Dad wanted me to handle things, remember? You agreed to let me take care of everything. Don't you dare twist this," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "This isn't about Dad trusting you. This is about you lying, stealing, and framing me for a crime you committed." For a moment, Liam said nothing. Then he stood up, towering over me. "You've always been so naive," he said coldly. "Do you really think you're entitled to everything? Dad might have wanted us to share, but you've never had what it takes to handle real responsibility. Someone had to step up." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "So you think that gives you the right to ruin my life?" "I didn't ruin your life," he said, his voice icy. "You did that all on your own." I left his house in a daze, feeling like I'd just been hit by a truck. Liam wasn't going to admit to anything, and he certainly wasn't going to help me. If anything, he seemed to think he was justified in everything he'd done. But now I had proof, or at least enough to start building a case against him. The forged signatures, the suspicious transfers, the access to my car. All of it pointed to a calculated effort to frame me and take control of the family's assets. What I didn't understand yet was why. Was it greed? Power? Or was there something even darker driving him? One thing was clear. This wasn't over. If Liam thought he could push me out of the picture, he was about to find out just how wrong he was. When I stormed back into Liam's house 2 days later, I was armed with everything I had: documents, evidence, and a boiling anger that had been simmering for years. I wasn't just confronting him about the money or the hit and run anymore. This was about every betrayal, every manipulation, and every lie he'd told to make himself look like the responsible one while painting me as the screw-up. He was in the living room when I walked in, casually scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. Mom was upstairs resting, thankfully spared from what was about to go down. "Liam," I said, slamming the folder of evidence onto the coffee table. He barely glanced at it. "What now?" he asked, his tone dripping with boredom. "You know exactly what," I snapped. "I've got bank records, estate documents, forged signatures. All of it points back to you. Stop pretending you don't know what this is about." He leaned back on the couch, folding his arms. "And what exactly are you planning to do with all that? Go to the police? Sue me? Good luck proving anything." I expected denial or maybe even a weak excuse, but his indifference caught me off guard. He didn't try to explain himself or refute the evidence. He just sat there, staring at me like I was the problem. "You don't even care, do you?" I said, my voice shaking. "You've been stealing from me, from Mom, and you don't even have the decency to pretend you feel bad about it." He shrugged. "You wouldn't understand. I needed to secure things for the future." "Secure what?" I shouted. "Your cushy lifestyle? Your control over everything Dad worked for? You're unbelievable, Liam." He stood up then, towering over me. "You don't get it," he said, his voice cold. "Dad left us a mess. You think running a family estate is easy? While you were off playing victim, I was the one keeping everything afloat. Do you have any idea how hard that is?" I laughed bitterly. "Hard? Stealing from your own family isn't hard, Liam. It's disgusting. I didn't want to fight in front of Mom, but I couldn't keep this from her anymore. She had a right to know what Liam had been doing. When she came downstairs later that afternoon, I sat her down and told her everything. The money, the forged signatures, the way Liam had been framing me for the hit and run." Her face went pale as I spoke. "Liam," she said, her voice trembling, "please tell me this isn't true." Instead of denying it, Liam did what he always did. He deflected. "Mom, you can't seriously believe her," he said, his tone exasperated. "She's been looking for a way to make me the bad guy ever since Dad died. She's just jealous because I've been the one taking care of everything." "Jealous?" I exploded. "You framed me for a crime, Liam. You stole money out of my account. This isn't about jealousy. It's about you being a liar and a thief." Mom looked between us, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't understand," she said weakly. "Why would you do this, Liam? To your own sister?" Liam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, I didn't do anything wrong. She's twisting things to make me look bad. I've been doing everything for this family, and this is the thanks I get." But Mom wasn't buying it. She might not have been as sharp as she once was, but she wasn't stupid. "Liam," she said, her voice firmer now, "you've always been good at talking your way out of things. But this time, I can see the truth." Her words seemed to hit him harder than anything I'd said. For a moment, his confident facade cracked. But it didn't last long. "Fine," he said, his voice icy. "If you want to take her side, go ahead. But don't come crying to me when everything falls apart." With that, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. From that day on, our family was split. Mom sided with me, but it was a hollow victory. Liam still had control over her finances, her care, and the house she was living in. I tried to convince her to move out, but she refused. "This is still my home," she said softly. "I can't leave it." I didn't want to push her, especially with her health being so fragile. But it killed me to know that Liam was still pulling the strings, even after everything he'd done. As the days turned into weeks, the tension between us only grew. Liam avoided me entirely, refusing to answer my calls or acknowledge me when I visited Mom. And Mom, for all her bravery in standing up to him, seemed more withdrawn than ever. It felt like our family had been shattered into pieces, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't put it back together. But I wasn't going to let Liam win. He might have the upper hand now, but I was determined to expose him for what he really was. And deep down, I knew that when the truth finally came out, there would be no going back. The days after my confrontation with Liam felt like being trapped in quicksand. Every attempt to climb out of the mess seemed futile, and the walls were closing in. The charges against me were still hanging over my head, and the court date loomed like a dark cloud. It wasn't just about avoiding jail. It was about proving that I wasn't the person everyone seemed to think I was. Mr. Grayson, my lawyer, suggested bringing in a private investigator. "If Liam isn't going to admit to anything, we need to find evidence that ties him to the hit and run," he said. "The footage is strong, but we need to poke holes in the prosecution's case and create reasonable doubt." Hiring a PI felt like a long shot, but at this point, I didn't have much choice. Enter Sarah, a no-nonsense investigator with a sharp eye for details. From the moment we met, she gave me hope. "Don't worry," she said. "People who pull stunts like this always leave breadcrumbs. We just have to find them." The first breakthrough came a week later. Sarah managed to get a clearer version of the surveillance footage from the intersection where the hit and run occurred. The original video was grainy and difficult to analyze, but this new version revealed a critical detail. The driver was wearing a hoodie and sunglasses. It was subtle, but something about the person's build and posture struck me as familiar. Liam. It had to be him. "This doesn't prove he was driving," Sarah warned, "but it's enough to cast doubt on the idea that it was you. No one dresses like that to just run errands, especially at night." We decided to dig deeper. Sarah subpoenaed Liam's phone records, looking for anything that could tie him to the scene of the crime. What she found was the smoking gun we desperately needed. The records placed Liam's phone near the intersection at the exact time of the accident. Not only that, but there were several calls made to an unknown number just minutes after the incident. Sarah traced the number to a local tow truck service. "Looks like your brother wasn't as careful as he thought," Sarah said with a satisfied smirk. We also found another damning piece of evidence. Liam had used his credit card at a gas station near the scene that same night. The timestamp matched the timeline perfectly. It was becoming increasingly clear that he was the one behind the wheel that night. When we presented this new evidence to Mr. Grayson, he immediately filed a motion to dismiss the charges against me. "This is more than enough to create reasonable doubt," he said. "And if we play our cards right, we might be able to shift the focus onto Liam entirely." The day of the hearing arrived, and I sat in the courtroom with my heart pounding in my chest. The prosecution tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, but Mr. Grayson countered with a clear narrative. I wasn't the driver, and the real culprit had gone to great lengths to frame me. The judge agreed to dismiss the charges, citing insufficient evidence to proceed. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I felt empty. Clearing my name was only part of the battle. The damage had already been done. In the weeks that followed, the fallout became apparent. My employer, who had been supportive at first, decided it was in the company's best interest to part ways. They didn't say it outright, but it was clear they didn't want someone with a criminal case, dismissed or not, tarnishing their reputation. My social circle also took a hit. Some friends distanced themselves, unsure of whether they believed my side of the story. Even the ones who stood by me seemed hesitant, as though they weren't entirely convinced of my innocence. It was isolating, like I'd been marked with a permanent scarlet letter. Through it all, Liam remained silent. He didn't reach out, didn't apologize, didn't even try to explain himself. It was infuriating. I wanted to confront him, to throw the evidence in his face and demand answers, but Sarah and Mr. Grayson advised against it. "Let him dig his own grave," Sarah said. "We've already exposed the truth. He'll slip up again. It's just a matter of time." She was right. Liam had been too careless for too long. I didn't know when or how, but I knew he'd eventually face the consequences of his actions. In the meantime, I focused on picking up the pieces of my life. It wasn't easy. Trusting people felt impossible, and the shadow of what Liam had done loomed over every decision I made. But one thing kept me going. I was free, and I wasn't going to let him take anything else from me. Liam might have won the first battle, but the war was far from over. Losing Mom was like losing a piece of myself. Even though she'd been unwell for a while, nothing prepares you for the finality of it. She passed quietly in her sleep one chilly autumn morning, and I was the one who found her. I'd stopped by Liam's house to bring her some fresh flowers. She loved lilies, and when I went upstairs to her room, she wasn't breathing. The days after her passing were a blur. Funeral arrangements, phone calls to distant relatives, condolence messages flooding in. It all felt surreal. Liam was oddly subdued during the whole process. He didn't argue when I offered to handle the arrangements, nor did he show much emotion at the service. It was like he was going through the motions, but his mind was somewhere else. For my part, I felt a deep sense of guilt. Mom had been caught in the middle of Liam's and my battles, and even though she'd sided with me in the end, I couldn't help but wonder if the stress had taken a toll on her. She deserved peace, and instead, she'd spent her final months surrounded by tension and distrust. A week after the funeral, the lawyer handling Mom's estate called Liam and me in for the reading of her will. I wasn't expecting any surprises. Mom had always been clear that she wanted her estate divided equally between us, just as Dad had intended. But when the lawyer started reading, my jaw dropped. Mom had made last-minute changes to her will, changes I hadn't been aware of. To my son, Liam, the lawyer read, I leave the sum of $50,000 and my collection of antique watches, which he always admired. I glanced at Liam, whose expression was unreadable. $50,000? That was a fraction of what Mom's estate was worth. The lawyer continued. To my daughter, my name. I leave the remainder of my estate, including the family home, investments, and all other assets. The room fell silent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom had left almost everything to me. Liam broke the silence with a bitter laugh. You've got to be kidding me, he said, leaning back in his chair. This is a joke, right? The lawyer adjusted his glasses. These changes were made approximately 3 months before her passing. She was of sound mind and made the decision of her own volition. Liam's laugh turned into a snarl. Sound mind? She could barely remember what day it was half the time. This is clearly the result of manipulation. I couldn't hold back anymore. Manipulation? I said, my voice rising. Are you serious? You're the one who's been controlling her finances and lying to her for years. If anyone manipulated her, it was you. Liam slammed his hand on the table. Don't you dare act like you're the innocent one here. You were always her favorite, always the golden child. She never saw how hard I worked to keep this family together while you sat back and did nothing. That's rich, I shot back. You didn't keep the family together. You tried to destroy it so you could line your pockets. The lawyer cleared his throat, cutting through the tension. I understand this is an emotional time, but the will is legally binding. If either of you wishes to contest it, you're welcome to pursue legal action. However, I must warn you that contesting a will is a lengthy and often costly process, and that's exactly what Liam did. He contested the will. For months, we were locked in a bitter legal battle. Liam argued that Mom wasn't of sound mind when she made the changes and that I had unduly influenced her. It was ironic, considering the mountain of evidence I had of his own manipulations. The court didn't buy his story. The lawyer who had amended the will testified that Mom was coherent and firm in her decision. She'd even gone as far as to record a video explaining her reasoning, just in case her mental state was questioned. I want to make sure my daughter is taken care of, Mom said in the video, her voice soft but steady. Liam has his own life and resources. This is what I feel is right. When the judge ruled in my favor, Liam's face was a mix of rage and defeat. The court upheld the will, and Liam walked out without a word. Winning felt hollow. Yes, I had the inheritance Mom intended for me, but I'd lost her in the process. And any hope of repairing my relationship with Liam was gone. After the court case, Liam cut all ties with me. He moved out of the family home and stopped answering my calls. Part of me wanted to reach out, to try and find some common ground, but the other part of me knew it was pointless. Liam had made his choices, and so had I. The family home felt empty without Mom, and every corner reminded me of what we'd lost. But it also reminded me of her strength, her love, and her unwavering belief in doing what was right. In the end, I realized that the inheritance wasn't just about money or property. It was about honoring her memory and proving that, even in the face of betrayal, truth and integrity could prevail. It was a bittersweet victory, but it was mine. A year passed, but the wounds Liam left on my life were slow to heal. The family home became both a sanctuary and a museum of bittersweet memories. I focused on rebuilding my life, starting a new job, reconnecting with old friends, and trying to shake the stigma Liam had saddled me with. Though the charges against me were dropped, whispers still followed me. The scars of that ordeal remained fresh. And then, as if the universe decided it wasn't done with Liam, karma finally came knocking. It started with a casual comment from a mutual acquaintance. Hey, did you hear about your brother? Something about his company being investigated. I brushed it off at first. Liam was always knee-deep in schemes, so hearing about another one didn't exactly shock me. But then the headlines started rolling in. Local businessman under investigation for fraud. It was Liam's face plastered next to those words, his cocky grin replaced by a deer-in-the-headlights expression. The details trickled out over weeks. Liam had been running some shady deals through his company, funneling money from fake accounts and dodging taxes. He'd been smart, or so he thought, but not smart enough to avoid red flags. When the authorities began unraveling his web of lies, they uncovered far more than just financial fraud. The investigation led them to his involvement in other crimes, including the forged documents from Dad's estate and, finally, the hit and run. Turns out, Liam hadn't been careful enough to cover his tracks completely. The paper trail I'd unearthed during my own ordeal was just the tip of the iceberg. The investigators found even more damning evidence. Phone records, receipts, and witness testimonies that placed him at the scene of the hit and run and linked him to the financial manipulation. I couldn't help but feel a grim sense of vindication as the pieces fell into place. Liam, who had worked so hard to paint me as the villain, was now being exposed as the real mastermind. The day of his arrest made the evening news. I wasn't even watching TV when it happened. I was scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up. Breaking. Local businessman Liam, last name, arrested for fraud, forgery, and hit-and-run charges. I clicked on the article, my heart pounding. There he was, being escorted out of his office in handcuffs, flanked by officers. He looked disheveled, his usual air of confidence replaced by something closer to panic. The irony wasn't lost on me. Liam had spent so much time orchestrating my downfall, and now he was the one facing prison time. But the real twist came a few days later. I was at home, trying to decide whether I felt triumphant or just sad about the whole thing, when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Hello? I answered hesitantly. My name, a familiar voice said. It took me a second to recognize it. It was hoarse, strained, and missing its usual bravado. It was Liam. What do you want? I asked, my tone icy. I wasn't in the mood for games. I need your help, he said. I laughed bitterly. My help? That's rich. Did you forget the part where you tried to ruin my life? Why on earth would I help you? I messed up, okay, he snapped, but there was no real anger in his voice. He sounded desperate. I don't have anyone else to turn to. Not my problem, I replied. Please, he said, his voice cracking. They're throwing everything at me. If I go to prison, I don't know if I'll make it. I could hear the panic, the vulnerability in his words, and for a moment, it softened me. This was my brother. After all, we'd grown up together, shared holidays, fought over toys. Part of me wanted to believe he was still the person who once protected me on the playground. But then I remembered the betrayal, the forged signatures, the stolen money, the lies, the way he'd watched me get arrested without a shred of remorse. Why should I care, Liam? I asked coldly. Because you're better than this, he said weakly. You're better than me. That line stuck with me long after the call ended. Liam had always been the arrogant one, the one who thought he was untouchable. Hearing him admit that I was better felt surreal, but his plea also left me conflicted. Part of me wanted to walk away, to let him face the consequences of his actions. He'd earned every bit of what was coming to him, and yet, another part of me, the part that still remembered the bond we once had, felt an ache I couldn't ignore. What if this was his rock bottom? What if helping him now could be the catalyst for him to change? In the end, I wasn't sure what to do. I had a choice to make: turn my back on him completely or offer him the lifeline he was begging for. As I sat there, staring at my phone, I realized that whatever decision I made would define not just Liam's future, but mine as well. It started with a letter, a thick envelope with my name scrawled across the front in Liam's familiar handwriting. I almost didn't open it. My first instinct was to toss it into the trash unopened. After all, what could he possibly say that I hadn't already heard? But something stopped me. Sitting at my kitchen table, I tore it open and began to read. The letter was long, rambling, and filled with apologies. Liam said he was sorry for everything: framing me, manipulating Mom, taking money that wasn't his. He admitted that he'd let his greed and pride consume him, and now, sitting in a jail cell, he'd had time to reflect on his actions. I was wrong, he wrote. I see that now. I destroyed our family, and I don't know how to fix it. I'm scared. My name? I don't want to spend the rest of my life in prison. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you to help me. Please, speak on my behalf at the trial. Tell them I've changed. You're the only one who can save me. I put the letter down and stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to crumple it up and throw it away. After everything Liam had done, he didn't deserve my help. He'd put me through hell, turned my life upside down, damaged my reputation, and shattered the trust between us. Why should I lift a finger to help him now? But another part of me wasn't so sure. Maybe this was his rock bottom, his chance to finally take responsibility and change. And if there was even a sliver of truth in his words, did I have it in me to completely turn my back on him? The question haunted me for days. I reread the letter so many times that I practically memorized it. Eventually, I decided that I needed to hear him out in person. If Liam was truly sorry, I wanted to look him in the eye and see it for myself. When I arrived at the jail, the air was heavy with the smell of disinfectant and something else I couldn't place. Desperation? Maybe. The guard escorted me to the visitors area, a cold, sterile room with glass partitions and phones for communication. Liam was already waiting on the other side, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller, less formidable. His hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked older, more vulnerable. I sat down and picked up the phone. Liam did the same, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't thank me yet," I replied, my tone sharp. "I'm not here to make any promises. I just want to hear what you have to say." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I know I've screwed up. I've hurt you, Mom, everyone. I don't even know where to start. I've been sitting in this cell for weeks, replaying everything in my head, and all I can think about is how much I wish I could take it all back. Why didn't you think about that before you ruined my life?" I shot back, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. "I don't know," he admitted, tears welling up in his eyes. "I was jealous, okay? You always had this light about you. Everyone loved you, especially Dad. I thought if I could just prove I was better, if I could take control, then maybe I'd finally feel like I mattered." His words shocked me. I'd always known Liam had a competitive streak, but I'd never realized the depth of his insecurity. Hearing him say it out loud was like peeling back a layer of his carefully constructed facade. "But framing me? Stealing from me? That's how you thought you'd prove yourself?" I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. "I wasn't thinking," he said, his voice breaking. "I let my jealousy and greed take over. And when things started spiraling, I didn't know how to stop. By the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with genuine remorse. "I know I've lost your trust, and I don't blame you for hating me. But please, my name, I'm begging you. I can't do this alone. If you speak at my trial, if you tell them I'm not a monster, maybe they'll show mercy." I sat there, torn. This was the most vulnerable I'd ever seen Liam. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by raw fear and regret. For the first time in years, he seemed human to me. Not the manipulative schemer who had destroyed my life, but the brother I'd grown up with. But was it real? Could I trust that his remorse was genuine, or was this just another act? As I left the jail that day, I couldn't shake the weight of his words. Liam was right about one thing. I had the power to influence his fate. The question was, did I want to? Helping him felt like betraying myself, but turning my back on him felt like a betrayal of the bond we once shared. No matter what I decided, I knew one thing. This choice would haunt me forever. The days following my meeting with Liam were some of the most conflicted of my life. His confession had opened a wound I didn't even know was still raw. Hearing him say the words out loud, his jealousy, his twisted reasoning for everything he'd done, it was both a validation of my suspicions and a blow to my heart. I spent hours replaying our conversation in my mind. "I just wanted to matter," he'd said, his voice cracking as tears streamed down his face. "Dad always looked at you like you were the future. I felt like I was just there, like I was an afterthought." I couldn't deny that Dad and I had shared a special bond, but I'd never seen it the way Liam did. To me, Liam had always been the one in the spotlight, the golden child who could do no wrong. I hadn't realized that behind his confidence, he'd been harboring resentment so deep it consumed him. But understanding his feelings didn't erase what he'd done. Liam had taken his pain and turned it into a weapon, and I was the one he'd aimed it at. The lies, the betrayal, the schemes. It was all too much to forgive, no matter how sincere his tears seemed. The morning of his trial, I sat in the courthouse parking lot for what felt like an eternity. I'd promised myself I wouldn't lie for him, wouldn't twist the truth to paint him in a better light. But I'd also decided I wouldn't go out of my way to make things worse. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about doing what felt right, even if that line was hard to see. When I finally walked into the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Liam sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His suit hung loosely on him, and his usually sharp eyes were dull, defeated. The prosecutor laid out the case with precision. The financial fraud, the forged documents, the hit and run. Piece by piece, they painted a picture of a man who had built his life on deceit and manipulation. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and stepped up to the stand. "Do you believe your brother acted with malicious intent?" the prosecutor asked, her tone calm but firm. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I believe my brother made terrible choices out of jealousy and insecurity. He was wrong, completely wrong. But I also think he was a broken person trying to fill a void in the worst possible way." There was a murmur in the courtroom, and I glanced at Liam. He was staring at the table, his shoulders hunched. The defense attorney tried to frame Liam as someone who had simply made mistakes. They argued that he'd already lost everything: his career, his reputation, and his family. and that prison would be unnecessarily harsh. When it came time for Liam to speak, he stood up and faced the judge. "I take full responsibility for what I did," he said, his voice steady but trembling at the edges. "I hurt the people I love, especially my sister. There's no excuse for what I did, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. All I can ask is for a chance to make things right someday." For the first time, I believed him. The sentencing was swift but fair. Liam was given several years in prison, with the possibility of parole after half his sentence was served. The judge acknowledged his remorse but emphasized that his crimes couldn't go unpunished. As the verdict was read, I felt an unexpected wave of emotion. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but relief. It was as though a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. After the trial, I lingered in the hallway outside the courtroom, unsure of what I was waiting for. Liam was being led out in handcuffs when he looked over at me. "I'm sorry," he mouthed. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes but refusing to fall. I didn't say anything back, but I hoped he saw the forgiveness in my expression. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I was no longer tied to Liam's shadow. The lies, the guilt, the constant tug of war. It was all behind me now. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. Rebuilding trust with myself and others took time. But for the first time, I felt like I could truly move forward. Liam and I might never repair our relationship, but I no longer felt consumed by anger or betrayal. Sometimes, letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to carry the lessons instead of the pain. And for me, that was enough.